Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Operationalizing Locally Led Development series. We're very excited to be adding a new aspect to our series. This is one we ran last year, focused on policy, and this year we are continuing to focus on policy and alternate between a US or international NGO focus and a NNGO focus that is a very top level way of describing the difference. We'll get into more detail of what those alternating aspects look like in just a moment. But we are very excited to have you here joining us today to hear from NNGO leaders on the challenges and opportunities of locally led development. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping things, and then I will hand it over to Humentum CEO, Dr. Christine So, to get us started on the discussion. So as you can see, we have many industry partners who help us do our work, and we're very excited to have their support and thank them for everything they do for the sector. Additionally, we do have a number of webinars upcoming, and I invite you to take a look at what we have on the calendar and join us for those other events. I'm going to go ahead and put a link to those events in the chat. And then I also encourage you, as I said, we've got this ongoing series, and I hope that you will join us for the others. They alternate every other month. Every month we have a locally led development webinar, and I encourage you to join us. And the next one in May will be on the 17th on capacity strengthening. And then in terms of housekeeping for today's event, we really encourage you to use the chat. That way, throughout the discussion, we can respond to your thoughts, your questions, and make it a dialogue with all of our attendees. Subtitles are available. You can turn those on by clicking on captions or live transcription at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you can turn those on. They will be also in the recording. So as just mentioned, the webinar is being recorded. You will receive a follow-up email by the end of this week, and that will include a link to the recording and then any follow-up materials that you may need related to the webinar. And we encourage you to share that recording with any of your colleagues who are unable to join. So again, put your questions in the chat. If you're having any technical issues, you can go ahead and put those in the chat, either send them directly to me by clicking on my name, Jessica Walker, in the dropdown, or you can just go ahead and put them in there publicly, and anyone from Humentum will do what we can to assist you. So with that, I am very pleased to be able to hand it over to our CEO.
Great. Thank you so much, Jessica. I am really happy to be here today with you all, and especially to welcome our panelists to today's discussion. We will be, as Jessica mentioned, talking about bringing locally led leader voices into the discussion around locally led development. And I think it's going to be a lively discussion. We've already had a great preview of that during our prep time. So with that, I want to welcome our panelists, Dr. Moses Isuba, who is the Executive Director of the Uganda National NGO Forum, Roswitha Kasande, who is the Executive Director of Youth Empowerment Transformation Trust in Zimbabwe, and Ernest Nyimai, who is the Executive Director of the National Association of Non-Governmental Organizations in Zimbabwe. I want to thank them all for being here and for being panelists today. I also want to thank them for the partnership they've already shown Humentum. We are working increasingly on trying to bring and amplify national leader voices in the discussion around power shifting and locally led development in the global development sector. And so I know that they've already been very instrumental in helping us formulate the way that we are looking at this. In today's webinar, we'll be hearing from them on the challenges and opportunities that they see with regards to shifting power and to working to achieve equitable development that is locally driven. We will be looking at all sorts of issues, but I think financial sustainability is something that we will definitely spend time on. And financial sustainability as defined by NNGO leaders is really a cornerstone for equipping the organizations to work towards transformation across the sector. We'll also be looking at the context in which we're doing this, how to bring the agenda forward, and ensuring that organizations are both able to operate in a sustainable way, but also in a transformational way. We know that already that there is shrinking political and civic space that hampers national NGO and local NGOs' abilities to operate, and that this is something that is very tied into the way that national and local organizations work, and so we can touch on that as well. So with that, oh, and actually, sorry, finally, I just want to also make another comment. Jessica referred to this, but again, to come back to it. From Humentum's perspective, if we are talking about creating enabling environments for locally led development, locally driven development, if we are talking about shifting power across the sector, we believe it's really critical to be talking to all of the stakeholder groups across the sector, and we really, in large categories, define that as funders, international NGOs, and national and local NGOs, and acknowledge that these three stakeholder groups are really clearly interconnected, interdependent, and that the relationships, especially when we look at business models, funding models, and operating models, the relationships are very interwoven. So we believe that you can't just look at, for example, funders without looking at how the funding is implemented. We need to be looking at all the parts of that equation. And so again, really, really happy that we can bring these leaders here today to give us some of the perspective from the locally led and national organization level. With that, I'm going to shift into some questions for our panelists. I do want to remind everybody who is participating in today's panel or in today's discussion that please do use the chat. We try to monitor the chat closely, pull questions from the chat as we go. So please do react to what you're hearing as we go, and we will try and integrate that and make this a very lively and dynamic session. So with that, once again, thank you to our panelists for being here. And I want to start with, I've already used the term locally led development multiple times, and I think that we hear that used a lot, but there are different definitions of what it is and what characteristics are actually critically important to making it work. So I would like to start with that, and I'm going to ask Roswitha to get us started. Maybe you can introduce yourself and introduce why locally led development is critical to what we are doing, and what does it mean in terms of your definition for locally led development? What are the critical pieces of that? Thanks.
Thank you very much. My name is Roswitha Katsande. I'm the Executive Director of Youth Empowerment and Transformation Trust. It's an NGO that is based and working in Zimbabwe, and we are championing youth participation and involvement in national discourse and broader development processes. And I'm very excited to be part of this conversation because as yet, we are currently implementing an activity with support from USAID, the Local Works Collaborative Action Network, where we are trying to advance locally led development in terms of how do we ensure that young people are able to co-create a holistic, inclusive economic empowerment program. So the conversation is so I'm looking forward to the discussions that we are going to be having in this process. So from where I'm sitting, I think when we talk of locally led development within the development discourse, I think it's really about how do we ensure that local actors, and when we talk of like local actors, we are talking of individuals, the communities, the organizations are able to set their own development agendas. How do we also have these local actors and maybe in particular national NGOs, the assumption is that the work that they are doing, they want to be able to address development challenges in their communities. So with locally led development, these national organizations are key in terms of identifying problems, solutions, and also it's also around how do we also bring the capacity, the leadership, and also ensuring that the local actors also get the resources for them to be able to ensure that these local solutions become a reality. I'm also glad to also indicate that the local-led development discourse it's an agenda that is also about how do we shift power and also ensure that local organizations are able to get the resources. They are also involved in terms of decision making, agenda setting, program implementation, and it also speaks to issues around resource management. And my last point around locally led development is also we are acknowledging that local actors, they have the capacity, they have the experience of working within the communities. So we need to see how we can be able to support them more so that they can be able to implement initiatives. And this concept is very key when we want to talk of sustainable development, because for us to realize sustainable development, we need to see how we can be able to ensure that these local actors are resourced, they have the capacity, they have the leadership to be able to bring about transformation in the communities, in the countries that they are operating in. So briefly, that's my analysis in terms of when we want to talk about local-led development, what it means.
Thank you. That's great. That was a very succinct but very, very rich response. And I want to just go to Moses and Ernest. Are there things that you would add to what Roswitha has laid out for us in terms of what locally led development consists of and what are the critical elements within it? Let me start with Moses.
Thank you, Kristen. I think for me, my name is Moses Isoba, and I lead a team here at the Uganda National NNGO Forum, which is a platform for governance and democracy influencing. I think from the word go, I think one of the things that I need to put straight is that these are statements that are, I think, getting to be tired, and tired in the sense that they're misused. And I think it is important to create a clear dichotomy between the statements and be able to understand their locus. I think locally led development is not the same as shift the power. It's not even the same as localization. These are completely different subjects, but I think when we start commingling them, then we definitely lose what it is. I think shift the power needs to be understood as a bottom-up process that is found in the South after realization that development as it is, or development as was conceptualized by President Truman, is not working. It's outdated. Not even a shine can be helpful. The system, which is the dominant system that we are working with, is pathologically ill, structurally flawed. It cannot deliver the development that we want. And NNGOs that have been gatekeepers for quite some time, I mean, they realize that also things need to be done differently. As people have said, the NNGO, as we know it yesterday, either transforms, dies well, or dies badly. And so the NNGO industry is alive to this fact and the need for transformation. And because they need to transform, there is a reaction to shift the power. And that reaction is what you call locally led development. the NNGO is trying to sanitize what would actually otherwise be its wrongs, the sins, the transgressions that have been committed by the NGO. I think the NGO is filled with rational individuals that are alive to the fact that something needs to be done differently. And so I want us to look at shift the power and local-led developments as two different things. One is from the south, that is its locus, and the other is from the north, and that's its locus. Of course, the shift the power movement has got some edge actors, people that could be deviants from the main dominant system who support the shift the power. But largely speaking, local-led development needs to be understood and situated in the north. And every time we confuse it with shift the power, we are losing it. On the other hand, localization is an effort to be able to deploy local resources, local finances, to deploy local leadership, to deploy local design and implementation. And again, yeah, so you see that the three are completely different. I mean, I could see that as Christine, as you're making your intro, I mean, you're using them sort of effortlessly as one can be the other. And I think the distinction needs to be made now, even before we begin talking of how can national NGOs be involved in this process, which is not our process anyway. How can national NGOs be use or continue to work with shifting the power, which is what we need to be able to keep the feet of the NGOs to the fire. I think we really, really need to keep the NGOs feet to the fire for there to be transformation. So I just thought I should start with that. So if you want me to come in again, I could.
Okay, thank you. You've started us off well. I think really important point that you're making is that language matters. I will just say that I think the examples that you gave, I can come in and say from the perspective of some others, there would be yet more definitional differences in addition to what you've laid out for us, which shows how complex and complicated this is, because sometimes I think we end up talking past each other when in fact we're trying to achieve a common goal. I am interested by the fact, and we'll get back to this, that you have talked about putting NNGO feet to the fire, but we haven't mentioned funders yet. And so I think that's a piece of this that we can come back to. With that, let me give Ernest a chance to weigh in. Ernest, over to you.
Thank you, Christine. And my name is Ernest Nyimai, and I'm the Executive Director for the National Association of Non-Governmental Organizations, which is the coordinating board of local NGOs here in Zimbabwe. Let me join other colleagues in trying to unpack local-led development. And I'm sure I concur with both of them in terms of the definitions and the disaggregation of local-led development and what it means to us as national NGOs. And again, just to also put a distinction between local-led development and locally driven development. I have seen that oftentimes we tend to use these two interchangeably, like what the previous speaker mentioned. Yet we are not necessarily looking at whether projects or things are happening at community level, but we are also looking at who is involved in the actual conceptualization. We are looking at implementation, we are looking at designing of the program, and even in terms of accountability, in terms of results, who is accountable to who. So for me, especially in the context of national NGOs, sometimes when we go out to communities, we consult as part of our day-to-day needs assessment so that we come up with our proposals, we come up with our project design. We want to believe that we are already implementing local-led development. Yet for me, in my own understanding, it's more of locally based development without necessarily involving the local actors, and also ensuring that there is a maximum community participation, there is ownership of whatever interventions that you are doing. And now when we start to talk about issues of sustainability, these are some of the dimensions that we then look at to say, whatever we are doing, is it really adding value in terms of making sure that there is sustainable development, which I believe is one of our overarching goal in terms of various programs that we'll be implementing. But again, local-led development, if you start implementing it, you will see that it becomes easy for you to start embracing other values such as diversity, where you look at the community not as an homogeneous, but you look at different, like community groups. You look at the persons with disability, you look at the young people, you look at marginalized women, So those are some of the things that you can look at as you advance local-led development. You also look at issues of equity. So it's not about only supporting local actors to mobilize resources or to also champion their own development, but also to look at who is benefiting out of it. And is there any sense of fairness, which is also one of the aspirations, is even under the sustainable development goals, of making sure that we don't leave anyone behind. And also the aspect of inclusion, which lately has become one of the key topical issue that as national NGOs, we are also trying to advance as we do our day-to-day work and operations. So for me, I think those are some of the things that I can add, but my colleagues have really adequately, tried to unpack local-led development.
Excellent, thank you. And I think that was a great compliment to what they've already laid out. Let me come back to Roswitha and ask you, when we think about this whole discussion and acknowledging and recognizing that we are talking about different concepts, but concepts that are related, a lot of this is being defined at the global level. There are, great statements being made. There are commitments being made by funders about where they want their funding to go. But do you see are these statements, are these definitions, are these calls for action credible? Do they have the right people at the table when they are being formulated and when those calls to actions are being made? And do you see the changes being made from the funder perspective, from the global level, that actually allow these commitments to be realized? Or are these words that are being spoken, but you don't see the action following on to actually realize the transformation that's being called for? So Roswitha, I'm picking on you to take us forward with this.
Yeah, thank you. So like you rightfully indicated, this locally led development, the discourse is being done at the global level. And I also feel that we need to also work around in terms of how we can also have the national NGOs being part of the discourse, being able to set the agenda, because we also want to avoid a situation where, commitments are done at global level, where we have the funding partners, the NGOs, but we want to say we want to be able to shift power to the national or local partners. So I feel that there is a gap in terms of then ensuring that when these conversations are done, or the discussions, we need to also create a situation where national NGOs are able to set the agenda in terms of what we think should be the discourse should be around. We also need to also be involved in terms of, those processes, in terms of decision making, when we want to talk about locally led development. So I've also seen that because of these global commitments that have been made by funding partners, for example, we've seen a shift in terms of more focus being around how they can be able to support local or national organizations to do their work. And I think when you look at most of these funding partners call for proposals, when they are soliciting for partners to work with, they also indicate that they are interested in working with partners that are already, that are working at national level. But one of the things that I also wanted to point out is that when we also talk about locally led development, I think we need to also appreciate that as national NGOs, we already have good models that we are already implementing in terms of what really works when it comes to programming, what really works when it comes to implementation, monitoring, and also ensuring sustainability of our interventions. So we need to also ensure that how then do we also work around to ensure that there is equality in terms of the power relations, so that we don't have the funding partners, the international NGOs then coming to then appear as if they know or understand the dynamics within the local context. So I think we have these commitments, and we have also seen a shift in terms of funding partners wanting to support local partners. But I think we are still a long way to go to then realize locally led development. And I think as national NGOs, and I'm also happy as we proceed with the discussion, we are also going to share insights in terms of some of the challenges that we are facing, which we also think needs to be addressed, so that we can also be able to fully realize locally led development, and also ensure that the national organizations are able to ensure that their interventions, they are sustainable, but most importantly, to also ensure that the interventions that we implementing, they are driven by the constituents, for example, the young people, the women, etc., that we are serving at community level. So that's my analysis. Thank you. Back to you.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to follow on to that, asking Moses, what are the barriers to participation that are keeping local and national leaders, community leaders, from participating in the setting of the agenda at the global level? I mean, we here are acknowledging that we need to have those voices leading the discussion, and in fact, we see that they are shut out of the discussion. What is getting in the way of that?
Well, I think, first of all, let me start maybe from a point that you did mention at my last intervention, when you said I did mention NNGOs, but I did not mention donors. I think from where I stand, the NNGOs and the donors are interwoven and actually committing incest. And you know, we're looking at this really as being one and the same. The focus is on the NNGO because I think right now, when you look at the NNGO industry, you look at the donor industry, I mean, the NNGO is the fulcrum for change. And oftentimes we look at that. So I think the people that we need to keep their feet to the fire is both the NNGO and the donors. But in terms of barriers for participation, I mean, the good news is that we as Southern actors, we are busy really trying to shift the power. We are, you know, operating in our sphere, on our space of shift the power. And I think that is raising, you know, from time to time. There's quite an amount of evangelization in terms of building and, you know, the disciples of people that can actually be able to engage in this movement. And I think the movement is growing, really by all standards, is growing. I think what you know, the question you're asking is that what could be the barriers of Southern actors participating in locally led development, which, as I said, is locus in the North. I think the greatest challenges for us is trust. I mean, you know, sometimes I think that Northern actors are participating in this because they are faced with an existential threat. And therefore, you know, they know that, as I said, you know, when you're an NGO, you either transform, die well, or die badly. And you know, these are rational individuals. They know that whether the NGO changes or doesn't change, the dominant system as we know it today is hospicing and is almost is composting. And you know, so whether the NGO changes or not, it definitely is going to be pushed to change. And therefore, you know, they are trying to really, you know, pull in a few thousand actors. And so one of the challenges that I get onto these discussions, and they are really not in short supply, I get invited these spaces. And for me, the question is, can I trust you? Can I trust you? Are you really serious that you are willing to let go of what you have actually fed off? I mean, many of these Northern actors feed off the system. They have been part of the system. They are actually hostages of the system. And so when they turn around and say, oh no, we really want to work with you, we want to do this. I mean, I always say it's like a thief who steals your goat in the night and then comes during the day to help you look for it. And so sometimes I think that the northern actors, you've stolen the goat, and you really know there's an existential threat, and you therefore trying to help us look for the goat. But you look for it so hard that you even make us to be amateurs. And so the first thing that really need to be, and for me, it's the trust issue, whether I can really trust you. I can trust these people that are on the table. And oftentimes, it's a table with about 20 white men or 20 white men and women, and maybe sprinkled in for cases sort of legitimacy with about 2 or 3 people from the South. So I think that for me is quite something that we really need to, is a bottleneck, the issue of trust. And then, of course, the other thing, as I said, from the global South where we are, and I mean, I don't even like the word global South, but, from the Southern Hemisphere where we are, I mean, a lot of work is going on. And, we are really trying to build citizen agency to be able to, through community philanthropy, to be able to build community voice and power, because we know that the more we're able to build that community voice and power, the more all these people that were previously baptized by the NNGO industry or the donor industry, they were baptized as beneficiaries. The more we actually are able to build a citizen agency, the more we are able to transist them from just being beneficiaries to co-investors. And they begin defining the trajectory of the kind of development that they want. And I think for me, every time we wake up to go and do that, and increasingly that is shaping up. And even what is even being more helpful is when many of our governments, think that we should stop getting resources from the north. I think that is itself important, because the challenge that we do have as southern actors is that we've been hooked to this severe addiction. It's a severe addiction of money coming from the north, of development aid coming from the north. So the more we are able to unhook a number of our northern national NGOs, if we can unhook these from this severe addiction to this dominant system, if we can unhook them from this dependency, and we can actually be able to say, look, I mean, the little resources you raise, they may not be in terms of volume, it may not be huge volume, but that's the kind of money that we need. It is warm money. It is warm money, as opposed to the cold money that we get from the aid agencies, which comes in billions, but that is cold money. The warm money that we raise from community philanthropy is the kind of money that we need to be able to trigger community voice and power, to be able to make people's citizen agency rise, to be able to raise people that they can be in charge of their own destiny. They can be in charge of their own development. They can challenge the dominant system, because the dominant system is going to die, whether we like it or not, whether we have these conversations or not. It is destined to die, because just like a human being, you get young, teenage, you grow old, you die. So what we need to be doing now, what are the kind of genes that we can pick from the compost to be able to construct the emergent system?
All right, thank you. I'm going to follow to Ernest with a question that builds on that, which is, Moses talks about moving away from the cold money towards the warm money and community philanthropy, and looking at our own communities in our own countries for funding and for engagement. At the same time, we're seeing real movement by many of these countries to shut down civic space. They don't want to see communities making decisions on their own. They do not want to see organizations coming into their own right to be able to be activists in their own communities. So how do you square that circle? How do you bring these things together? Ernest, can you give us your thoughts on that?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. So I think the first thing is around the issue of trust that Moses was alluding to earlier on, to say there are a lot of trust issues, even if you look at other global campaigns and agendas that have been set. For example, we look at the grand bargain, commitments which were made and where international NGOs committed to also start implementing the shift, the power, where they are also working with the local NGOs, ensuring that even they don't implement in countries. And I think what we have seen, maybe because of the dwindling, funding opportunities and resources, where in the global south, like in our case in Zimbabwe, we have been experiencing donor fatigue and donor apathy. And as a result, we have started to see these international NGOs being kind of proactive, where some of them, they've started even registering organizations that are now locally registered. And now even funding partners, when they issue requests for proposals and indicate that this is specifically to support national NGOs, they will now use their locally registered organizations to compete for that. And there has been, for example, in our case, this whole misconception that local NGOs have no capacity. And for me, I always ask myself, what kind of capacity are we talking about? Because this is about addressing the solutions, addressing the challenges rather, and come up with solutions to various, development problems that we are facing as countries. And who is better placed? Us, because we look at the issue of context, we look at the issues of a deeper understanding of the problem itself, and also involvement of the communities, which for me dovetails well with the whole concept of local-led development. And now looking at maybe just to directly respond to your question around the context where we are talking about the shifting power and also the shrinking civic space. Yes, it seems like as national NGOs, we have been at the receiving end in terms of various legislative, administrative, and operational requirements that are being introduced in countries, which in our view has been contributing to the stifling of the operating environment. And it's quite unfortunate that some of these new policies are actually prompted by international standards, such as, for example, we talk of the Financial Action Task Force Recommendation 8 around terrorism financing, where countries are required to come up with laws to try and ensure that their non-profit organization sector is not abused for money laundering and terrorism financing. But if you look at the discourse, it seems like the national NGOs are so much suspected as vulnerable compared to international NGOs. Yet for me, from my understanding, when we look at the vulnerabilities, the international NGOs might actually have more inherent risks and might actually be more vulnerable. But if you look at the policies, the measures that are being introduced, it's actually targeting more of the national NGOs as opposed to the international NGOs. And if you look at the response now, the international NGOs seem to be taking advantage of some of these, new policies that are being introduced, where they've started even implementing on the ground without, knowledge, or where they come to you as an implementing partner. It's more like a unidirectional kind of relationship where they'll tell you what to do. There is no flexibility for you to also share from your contextual analysis and understanding what are some of the things and the pressing needs which might actually give us the value for money and which can help us to address the challenges that we are facing. But you see that kind of a relationship where international, NGOs will always come to you and say, can you do a BCD, without necessarily giving you room to also input into the program design, the implementation arrangement, the methodology to be used. And these are some of the challenges that are actually equally contributing to some of the closure of certain national NGOs. And also looking at the issue of resilience, you will see that sometimes even the grant making itself from the international NGOs or the donors themselves and development partners, it's also quite, rigid to such an extent that for a nascent community-based organization, it doesn't qualify. And sometimes you will see that during the implementation, whatever you're receiving is probably activity-based support, which doesn't also assist in terms of you taking care of your administrative needs as an organization, issues of organizational strengthening. Because when you receive resources, it is our expectation to also then benefit in terms of organizational development, such that going forward, we will be able to be mature, we will be able to be financially resilient as organizations. So those are some of the things that I feel as we are discussing about this, we need to interrogate, and even in terms of our relationship with international NGOs, especially in terms of implementation of commitments that are being made. And it's also equally because of our limited participation, or sometimes we don't even participate, but we just hear policies and resolutions being made without our inputs. So that could be my reflection on that. Back to you.
Great, thank you. And you've set us up nicely, because I wanted to shift a little bit to talk specifically around financial sustainability. And so, Roswitha, let me come to you. Thinking about NNGO participation in this space, being active, contributing, and being at the table in terms of helping to define priorities and calls to action around locally led development, locally driven development, shifting power, all of these things. I think we see two things, and actually we've got a note in the chat about this. One is, organizations struggling because of trying to get the resources that they need to do the work that they're doing. At the same time, we don't have the local funding available in the ways that some of us have alluded to in this conversation that we would like to see. But also, we know that when you are an organization and you are looking for funding and worrying about how to pay your staff and to cover your costs, in part because you're not getting fair funding from the organizations that are asking you to do work and funding you, it's very hard to add on top of that, okay, I'm also going to go out and be an activist and be active in this space to push for transformation, because you are trying to make the payroll at the end of the month at the same time. So could you speak a little bit to where financial sustainability fits into all of this for you? How do you think about it? How do you think it influences the way that we are going about moving towards or not moving towards locally led development?
Thank you. So I think issues of financial sustainability are very key to this conversation, because when we want to see local actors, the national NGOs being able to implement sustainable programs to transform communities, we need to ensure that they have the adequate resources for them to be able to do the work. And for me, the concern has also been around, like you rightfully indicated, that we have challenges around lack or limited resources for national organizations, where in most cases there is limited resources available. And in other instances, you can also have challenges on the part of the local organizations to be able to secure or procure sufficient funding, because, for example, the procurement requirements or the donor requirements are not flexible for national organizations. So sometimes you can also see these procurement procedures that actually require people with expertise around program development, monitoring, evaluation, among other key areas, which a lot of national organizations may not have. And some of the processes of even applying for a grant, submitting a proposal, and it's very cumbersome, which creates challenges for most local organizations. And because of this lack of funding, and also because local national organizations are also sometimes desperate for resources to be able to implement programs, you may then end up in a situation where, as a national organization, you are then relegated to the role of a sub-awardee or an implementer within a certain setup, where maybe the NGO may get more resources, but you as the local partner, you're just getting a very small percentage, which may even be difficult for you to ensure that you are able to implement the programs effectively. And I'm also looking at issues around sustainability to then say, how do we also ensure that we also have flexible approaches to funding? How do we also ensure that the national organizations are not only getting project-based funding, and it also even limits your autonomy and even your capacity to be able to do work at community level. And it also even raises questions around sustainability. How are you going to even make sure that your interventions are sustainable at community level, where maybe you are receiving project funding for 6 months or a year? So I think the issues of financial sustainability are very key to also ensure that the local organizations are able to get adequate resources for them to be able to implement initiatives, so resources for programming, staff retention, staff capacity development, among other key human, social, economic, and environmental resources that are required by national NGOs. And then coming to the second issue that you highlighted around local funding, I'm also glad to maybe contribute the debate that maybe this could be one of the mechanisms that as national NGOs, we could also be exploring to then say, within our local context, what are the available resources that we can also harness so that we can be able to get resources for us to be able to do our work. And I think the market dynamics within the world are also showing a shift where we are now having new actors in development. For example, the private sector, foundations. I think there has been an indication around philanthropy. And I think it's also a challenge for us as national NGOs to then even starting conversations and also exploring our maybe new models of development finance. How do we even start working around initiatives on social enterprise so that we can be able to raise resources to be able to support the work that we do. And I also wanted to then highlight that because we have these issues around financial sustainability of the national NGOs, I think tied to the issue around the shrinking civic space, the difficult operational regulations, sometimes it can then limit how much you can be able to do as a national organization, because on one end, you spend much of your time soliciting for resources, writing proposals, attending meetings, but there's also the work that needs to be done at community level in terms of organizing, in terms of enhancing agents of the citizens on issues that you are mobilizing around. So I think we need to also ensure that we work more towards ensuring that there is financial sustainability of national organizations, national NGOs, so that they can be able to bring the transformation that they're working towards if we really want to talk about locally led development. So as long as we don't have the resources that we can be able to mobilize even locally, I think these was discussions around locally led development may remain mere rhetoric.
Thank you, Roswitha. Let me go to Moses, and building off of what she was just saying, we are in this transformation or transitional phase, and how do we keep activism going while organizations are trying to ensure the payroll at the end of the month, possibly transition from traditional sources of funding from the North to community philanthropy, local funding, which, as we've all recognized, is not yet as vibrant as we would like it to be. How do we keep this going?
I think, Christine, you did mention at the beginning that language matters. And I think as really part of our work that we're doing under NNGO is to decolonize language and be able to see, using language appropriately. I think one of the things that's certainly gotten into the NGO mainstream is the language of NGO sustainability, financial sustainability, and resilience. And I mean, I can dare ask, who say that we as NGOs need to be financially sustainable? Are we supposed to be financially sustainable in order to bequeath something to other people? Or are we talking about us having sufficient resources that we can use to run our spaces, our operations? Because when we talk about financial resilience, when we talk about financial sustainability, it's completely different from our understanding of me having resources that I need to be able to run my programs. And maybe I'm set up to be able to address, and I set up this organization to address issues of COVID, and there is no COVID, and therefore we wind up. We wind up because then there is no COVID. Or we're supposed to be addressing HIV, we wind up. Or we are supposed to be addressing issues of good governance. Maybe now we become so democratic, we're no longer autocratic, and so we wind up. So I think for me, that's another debate. I think one of the things that we must say, if I was to just flow in the current narrative as we understand, first of all, I would say that many of the organizations in the South have lived on a starvation life cycle for a long, long time. And if therefore one was looking at organizations that are resilient, I think many of our organizations here are resilient. We hang on hope just by our fingernails, just because of this, of the little resources that we get. And so one of the things that really we appreciate the fact that yes, community philanthropy does not give us the kind of huge amount of resources, $500,000, $300,000. But I think the good thing, of course, with shrinking civic space, if there is at least a good part of it, is that it is weaning us off. It is weaning us off from bilateral donors. It is unhooking us from the dominant system. Because it's increasingly getting difficult to get money from outside. If you're, for instance, working in India, it's completely difficult to get money from outside. And so even if we didn't like community philanthropy, we have no option but to like it. Even if we are used to this, high volume and cold money, we now have no choice but to look at low volume and warm money. And so when I hear people talk, oh no, we like foreign aid, it's been what? I mean, it's like saying, you like your abusive husband because he brings you flowers. So I think it's just important that if the husband is abusive, never mind the number of flowers he brings, we must call out the husband that is abusive. I would rather live with another husband who is not abusive, but we have a relationship. So for me, yes, the one thing is that community philanthropy is a new thing, but I wouldn't even think it's a new thing. I mean, we have been giving money. You go into communities, and communities have got money, they've got skills, they've got networks, they've got relationships, and that is what we need to be building on. And the money doesn't come in the volume that we want, but that's a different conversation. Now, if we are going to have this continuation of getting resources from the bilateral donors, one of the things that we need to be having an honest conversation is about how they can support institutional overhead costs. I mean, if you're an NNGO, you can walk away with your NICRA, your negotiated indirect cost rate of even up to 30%. And if you're a national NGO like myself, then I have a difficult conversation with the donors to be able to, oh no, we can only give you 7%. Well, the NGO across the street, because they've got a negotiated indirect cost agreement, they go smiling to the bank with 30% because they have a NICRA. So we need to be telling donors that, look, you cannot preach water and drink wine. You cannot say that you are interested in actually supporting these organizations, but yet at the same time, you are keeping them on the drip. And you're keeping them in the intensive care unit. And when you depart, it's like switching off oxygen, they die with you. Because you are not investing in the institutional health. You are not supporting them to cover the institutional overhead costs. And so we need these donors to be able to support us to cover institutional overhead costs. And when they do, then we can meaningfully engage in these conversations. Because what is happening right now, that many of the organizations in the South, they are living with chronic fatigue. As a leader, I live with chronic fatigue because I lead an organization on a financial tightrope. And when I'm leading an organization on a financial tightrope, that in a way drains away my energy. It takes away my bandwidth to be able to engage in core and strategic activities, to be able to engage in these other conversations. And so, whether you romanticize this and so, we would like you to be involved in the locally led development. If I do not have internet, I do not have rent, I do not have an institutional home, I do not have, first of all, where are you going to meet me? where are you going to meet me? So we need to be able to be shifting the conversation and saying, look, we need these things covered. We even need to be shifting the conversation that we're not looking for monies to be financially sustainable and be able to pass over these NGOs to our children's children. We're looking for monies that we can actually be able, looking for resources to scale up activities, to be able to derive more dividends. And so let us not be lost in the jargon of sustainability, resilience, what needs to be what, and say what we need. We need the resources to be able to scale up. We need donors to cover institutional overhead costs. And there is no way. And let us not hide into how do we get involved in local-led development? Because that is what we've been doing. We've been doing that. And that's what we've been calling on, that, if you're an NNGO, you're a donor, please respect the subsidiarity principle. We know those that closest to the ground may not speak in articulate English, let alone there's a problem that development is even primed in English, Spanish, and French. We should be having this conversation in our local languages. But so we need to be able to be challenging that narrative and looking at things differently. And so there are all these conversations of shift the power, locally led development, community philanthropy, decolonization. They come in all shades. But at the end of the day, we should be preoccupied in improving social indicators of our people. And how do we do that? We need to be rethinking about how development is being done. We need to be reimagining development. NGOs need to be even reimagining their country offices. These country offices are colonial outposts. They are really colonial outposts. They are waiting to take instructions from Brussels, from London, from Washington. And that's why now because of an existential threat, you hear them now taking local registration. And when USAID makes the posts an APS, they all go, oh, we are making this application. So for me, I think the conversation is larger. It's all about, it's a process, it's a mindset change. It's gonna take time, but we are on it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think you're making a really important point where we have to make a distinction between financial sustainability that is necessary for impact and scale and change and the good of the communities, and financial sustainability that organizations may be trying to achieve to remain existent. And so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that I am looking for funding to keep on existing, to look for continual funding. And I think that going back to an earlier part of the conversation, this goes back to the idea that NGOs see themselves under existential threat, because in fact, as the models shift, as we are calling for change in the sector, it takes away the reason for NGOs to be in existence, and they have to rethink what is their role, do they have a role, and how do they move towards that role. So it's really a distinction between working for impact and working to self-perpetuate. Ernest, reactions, thoughts, comments, new ideas?
Okay, thank you very much. So I think I want to concur with Moses in terms of the issue of mindset. And also when you talk about the issue of resilience, I want to believe and concur with him that we are really firm and resilient as organizations, because we are really operating in a shoestring, budget in terms of especially institutional support in terms of overheads. And this just to add another dimension. Right now, if you look at even labor practices, it's really being questioned, because we tend to rely with, for example, what we call volunteers, programs, where you end up working with staff members who are not even paid. So when you start, having conversations around NGO legitimacy, these are some of the points that are being raised against us. But we know for sure that these international NGOs are the ones that are contributing to it. And we start also questioning some of these commitments to say, are we really honest and sincere when we talk about 25% of the total funding going towards the support directly to local NGOs? We look at issues of 50%, of the implementation being done by local actors themselves. And now if you look at the support, because if you look at our context, especially as the developing countries, it's really difficult for you to do even grassroots organizing, for you to get people under one, under one place to discuss even issues of socioeconomic issues that affect their lives, or just to have a conversations around how can we take care of our challenges and propose, solutions to the development challenges that we are facing. So when you talk about issues of financial sustainability, I think those are some of the things that we really need to interrogate. Another example is for when these international NGOs, sub-grants, or even the donors themselves, the first thing they ask for is, do you have the audit reports for the past years? And yet in the same budget that we are discussing, there is no provision for audit fees. So who do you want to, from where are we getting those resources for us to facilitate such process of auditing? So for me, it's really something that we need to interrogate. You look at the list of documents when they undertake due diligence and pre-award assessment, they ask you for strategic plan, they go through everything and say who worked on this, and from where can we get the funds and the resources to support even consultants who can come up with a resource mobilization plan for the organization, the strategic plan. They ask you how frequent are you, updating your finance policy. And if you look at the best practices, they will be telling you after every 3 years, you need to at least make sure that you review and update and you get a consultant. But on the grant that we are discussing, even in terms of staffing, there is nothing. And you look at, sometimes for me, it's quite disturbing. You look at the reporting timelines, you will be required to produce a weekly report. And yet they are, in terms of the staffing, they are only paying probably one person, or even all the staff members, they are not being paid. It's a purely an activity-based kind of grant. You look at the reporting template, it's quite thorough. You have to spend about a full week, trying to prepare a report for only $5,000 US. And now when they submit those reports again to the back donors, your name will not appear anyway. The credit goes to the international NGOs, to the donors themselves, especially the resident donors. So I think I want to concur with Moses that we really need to have serious conversations around some of these things, because even in terms of us being able to continue mobilizing resources and also to legitimize our institutions, you really need to at least make sure that you have a very rigorous process of ensuring that there is organizational development, there is institutional strengthening, you have different policies, manuals, and governance structures as expected, such that in the minds and the perspective of the donors, the state actors, and also even if you look at the communities themselves, they should really justify and understand that you are operating as a credible and a legitimate institution, because you have all those mechanisms here. So that could be my addition to that.
Thank you, Ernest. Let me go back to Roswitha. Where is this taking you in terms of your thoughts and comments, and what do you want to add? We're winding down, so I want to make sure that I give everybody more time to react to everything that's being said. It's been such a great discussion.
Thank you very much. So I agree with the other panelists in terms of the fact that I think when you talk about locally led development, it's mere talk, and we haven't been seeing much action. And I also wanted to hammer on the issue around, the nature of the unequal power relations that are there. If you want to look at the NGOs and the national NGOs. So, for example, like what has been indicated earlier on, most of these donors or funding partners, they have certain perceptions in terms of how risky it is working with local organizations. Some of them, they are risk averse. But I think when we want to talk about the development discourse, accountability should be for both the international NGO and the local organization. So I think we need also to ensure that when we talk about accountability or whatever mechanisms, I think these should also apply to all the organizations. And I think it's also worrying, like what has been indicated, to then say, in most instances, because these national NGOs, you don't have resources, you are also not able to then make decisions in terms of how the resources are going to be used and also how you can even do implementation. So I also get worried and also concerned if the funding partner or they come and say, we want you to do this work and do these activities. But sometimes you then say, we are working with young people, for example, we know their priorities, we know what they want. This is what we think we need to prioritize on. So I think it's also around how then do we also work around building the resilience, strengthening the capacity of the national NGOs so that we can be able to, start conversations like what has been saying, shifting the conversation so that at our level, we also have clarity in terms of how we are defining locally led development, financial sustainability, the vision, how we also want to envision the development discourse. And I think it's also important that as national NGOs, we also hold these donors accountable for the commitments that they've done. And when we also have conversations with them, we also need to ensure that we also work around movement building and also even collective advocacy, because I think we need to also see how we can be able to come together, speak with one voice on these issues in terms of the challenges that we are facing as national NGOs, so that I've seen a tendency that if they come and then they see this organization is not open to some of their demands, they can even go to the other smaller organizations. So I think it's important that we also work around on ensuring that the national NGOs are able to sit down and also have their own narrative in terms of what it should be, the development discourse. And I think what has been indicated earlier on was that we are already doing great work at, as national NGOs. How then do we also even work more towards amplifying the work that we are already doing? Because when you want to interact with a funding partner or NGOs talking about how maybe ideas in terms of how you can empower young people, we are already working with young people. We know the best practice. We know what really works. So for me, it's also around how do we amplify so that we can even show that we are able to do great work as we work in these communities. But I'm also thinking that maybe building on the earlier conversation that we had around the shrinking space and the difficult operating environment, I'm also thinking that as national NGOs, how then do we also push for more collaboration and coordination amongst ourselves so that we can be able to utilize our different strengths, the opportunities that are in the context so that we can be able to do great work within the communities. But I think what is coming from this conversation is that we need to change the narrative. We need to change the discourse so that when we want to talk about issues that affect the national NGOs, I think they should have the voice, the leadership, the agents to be able to talk about these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. And actually that sets me up well for my next question, because I did want to ask Moses and Ernest. I'll start with Moses. What is the role of a national NGO forum? How can the collective body contribute to moving this forward and actually moving towards the change that we've been talking about?
I think for us, we remain alive to the fact that behind this veil, the veil of donors and the veil of the NGOs, are some good people, real human beings with warm bodies. But they are held hostage by the system. And so the more we are able to do the movement building and be able to grow community power and voice, we hope that we can actually be able to look at this as a rescue mission, to be able to release these hostages that are being held hostage by the system. Because today, Christine, you are a good person, but tomorrow when you get to be the chief executive at the World Bank, we can't even identify you. And we don't know what happened to you, how you mutated. And so you get in there as Christine, but then the system works on you and you become hostage. So I think what we can actually do as Southern actors is to be able to appreciate the dichotomy between the hardware and the software. The hardware being the system. I mean, we all talk about systems change. You know, there's been, doctoral thesis written about how to do system change. But, when you ask, what is the system? How can I touch it? And you can't touch it. But behind this system are human beings and the software. Those are the people that we really want to be working with, to be able to change their mindset, to be able to change the way they're going to be able to look at things, to make them to be sensitive to the people that they are trying to do development to. And instead of doing the development to, that they start doing the development with. So we will need to do that. This is a process. It's a long process that we are engaged in. It's a process of releasing hostages. It's a rescue mission. It's a process of working on software to be able to see how we can then be able to go around the aspects of the hardware. But I think also, how I think we can actually be involved is to be able to push back. I think many of these things that we faced with that, Ernest has been talking about, when they come to ask about this, we need to be pushing back. Some of these are intrusive. And they're intrusive, dehumanizing, and we need to be able to push back. And I mean, I have actually been able to say no to money, and the world doesn't come to an end. I mean, we're still here. I'm talking on this webinar, but so we need to be able to push back. We need to be able to push back to these intrusive, processes. We also need to be able to continually, it's going to take time, but we need to know to continually speak to the either donors, NNGOs, that, the lack of context, the lack of giving contextual flavor to development is one of the greatest challenges that we do have. I mean, you have people that are flying in from wherever to wherever, coming, oh no, I'm coming to do this in Uganda, I'm coming to do this in Zimbabwe, without the understanding of the context, without appreciating how they can actually deploy local knowledge, how they can deploy local expertise. And somebody comes and he thinks he can fix that, and that in itself is a problem. And I think the kind of movement that we're involved in this shift to the power is to be able to push back on these things, to be able to look at things to be done differently. We're also trying to build the citizen agency. And I think the more we're able to build the citizen agency and to be able to challenge language, decolonize language, be able to move away from this dichotomy of pressing a higher premium on ivory tower knowledge, as opposed to pressing a higher premium on ebony tower knowledge. The more we're able to say, look, ebony tower knowledge counts more, perhaps more than ivory tower, or as much. The more we're able to do that, the more we're able to get to make some gains. I must end by saying that what we're actually involved in is like eating an elephant. We are going to eat it piece by piece, but we shall finish it.
Okay, thank you. I may give you one more chance to end us, so keep thinking on those last parting words that you would like to have. But first, let me go to Ernest. And Ernest, can you tell us about where you're seeing the role of collectives, of national NGO forums, or any other comments that you'd like to share?
Okay, thank you. So let me start by concurring with Moses in terms of especially the issue of pushback. For me, I think internationally it's recognized that there is a democratic regression, there is a democracy backsliding, and also there is actually, because of the fact that national NGOs are at its weakest because of the shrinking civic space, we have started to see emerging developments around authoritarian consolidation of power by especially ruling regimes. And I think it's something that we can't just watch and fold hands as NGOs. But in doing so, in my own opinion, I think we need to push back from a position of strength. So when we talk about the position of strength, we are talking about, for example, we need to enhance and improve our trust dividend with the public, with the community as our support base. So the aspect of movement building becomes very, very important. And how we can do this is, for example, I think over the past 3 years, I have been trying to assess, for example, in Zimbabwe, there has been quite a number of developments, which in our view equally contributes to shrinking civic space. We have seen appetite for greater control and regulation of NGO operations in the country. And I have been trying to do a self-introspection to say, how can we justify our existence, the purpose of existence? How do we, try to make sure that even the communities, those that benefits directly from our programs, can vouch for us? And what has been lacking is profiling of our success stories, the transformation journey. If you look at different institutions, if we are speaking on our own amongst ourselves, you can appreciate that we are doing a lot of work, and we have so far we have achieved quite a lot in terms of assisting these communities in addressing various development challenges. But is there somewhere where you can get that information to say, okay, so as a collective, as a sector, for example, NGOs in Zimbabwe, what is it that we have contributed in terms of development for the past 5 years? We have this information, but it's sitting somewhere in our offices, in our files. So it's something that going forward, I think, as we try to increase our legitimacy and relevance, we need to start, documentation, profiling our work, so that those that are against us, even this whole idea of saying, NGOs, local NGOs, they don't have capacity. Because for me, we also need to define even results beyond the log frames, the M&E frameworks, the indicator reference matrix. For me, having achieved to conduct 8 meetings out of 8 as planned is not results. I want to see a social change in communities. I want to see progressive realization and enjoyment of rights by all in the communities. For me, that's what I call, results. And if we start to become result-oriented, you also see that we will start to also question some of the programs where one of the challenges that we have is a touch and go kind of approach, where today, because you got someone or a particular donor which is interested in climate justice, so for the next six months, you are implementing a program on justice. Beyond that support, you then go elsewhere. We are now on health. So at the end of the day, for us to locate what exactly have you contributed, because development is a process, you need to continuously push more. You need to build blocks so that at the end of the day, you will be able to achieve. So I think for me, that's one of the things that probably we need to look at, and also to ensure that we go beyond superficial results in terms of our work. And then issues of solidarity and partnerships is also very important. It seems like, for example, if you look at Africa, the challenges that Uganda is facing in terms of the state of civic space is equally the same with what we are facing here in Zimbabwe. But there seems to be absence of a platform where even as leaders of NGOs in different countries, we can coalesce, we share ideas, we build solidarity, and we support each other, I think it's something that is also missing, that going forward, as we are trying to build citizen agents, we need to support each other. There are certain countries where they have tried some of the models in terms of pushback, and it really worked. I know there are countries right now, because of those regulatory frameworks, they have started the journey of coming up with self-regulation mechanisms where you can actually justify yourself, you benchmark your work to certain standards, and there is sanity across the sector. It's something that we can learn from one another. And I think going forward, for us, especially as NNGO here, we are also exploring ways of trying to advance those kind of mechanisms, such that at the end of the day, there is movement building. We fight as a unit, and there is less fragmentation and disjointed efforts, which oftentimes give room for divide and rule, especially from the oppressors. It might be the state institutions who are against the existence of NGOs. It might be these international NGOs. They're actually benefiting because of the fragmentation and disjointed efforts in the sector. Thank you.
Great, thank you. First, I'm going to apologize. I have a dog barking in the background and I can't do anything about it. So he is barking his enthusiasm about everything we're talking about today. Let me wind us down. We're almost out of time, but I'd like to hear from each of you. Is change happening, and what is the major barrier to change? Or any other parting comment you would like to share with us. I'm going to start back with Ernest. I'm going to go to Moses, and then I'm going to give Roswitha the last word. Ernest, over to you. Ernest, you're on mute. Sorry.
Oh, my apologies for that. So for me, I want to share about 3 barriers that I think is actually affecting our work in terms of local development. The first one, obviously, is shrinking civic space. We are trying to do grassroots organizing. Right now, for example, in our case, civic engagement is quite difficult. There are multiple levels of gatekeeping. For example, if you go to lower tiers of the government, there are a lot of clearances that are required. You are supposed to solicit for memorandum of understanding before you do any work. So this is exactly why we are quite concerned about the shrinking civic space. And for me, it's actually a real challenge that we are facing, especially in as far as grassroots mobilization and organizing is concerned. The second one is around capacity deficiencies. From this whole conversation, you can see that if national NGOs like ourselves, where we are operating across the country, what about the lower level as community-based organization? And when you talk about capacity deficiencies, I'm simply looking at financial resources to implement activities. I'm looking at institutional strengthening issues. I'm looking at issues of even the program management itself. So I think it's something that is also a barrier at the moment. We need to really find ways and means to look at it. And then again, this issue of international NGOs, for example, in our case, I think we have a lot of challenges where they are trying to be implementers. They're actually crowding out almost all of them. They've opened, locally registered organizations that are competing for resources. And you will see that in terms of us being able to attract those resources, it's a bit difficult. Whilst we are exploring other ways like social enterprising, we are also trying to benefit through working directly with the private sector, through their corporate social responsibilities, for us to at least also get some resources to fund, some of our initiative. But this is still, work in progress. It's not yet enough, but I'm happy that we are resilient and we are actually being able to implement our activities. Thank you.
Moses, over to you.
Yes, change is happening. There are only 2 barriers here. First of all, I think we are addressing this with different histories. We have our own history, which informs us how we address issues of shifting the power. Those in the North have their history that informs them on how to try and do locally led development, which, as I said, is a way of sanitizing past transgressions. So we are looking at this change, using different lenses of our history. So that in itself is also, the barrier. But even more, the other barrier that I look at in terms of really, us steaming ahead with the change that we want and at the speed that we want, that when you look at this change ecosystem, we have the NNGOs, we have the donors, we have the national NGOs that are involved in these conversations. But I think the missing voice are the communities. I mean, here we are talking, as elites, and the people who we all want to do development with are not on these webinars. They're not in these conversations. And I think the fact that those voices, the community voices are not, and yet community voices are critically important, because communities have resources, have money, have skills, have knowledge, have relationships, and we need to be able to bring them into these ecosystems for change. But that said, I want to end by saying that decolonization, as we all want to do from the South, is radical love. It's radical love to challenge patriarchal toxicity. It's radical love to try and deconstruct the structures that have inhibited our participation. It's radical love to be able to make sure that development is not about counting how many people attended a meeting, but that we can see that the social indicators of our people continue to change. But as of now, they are depressingly poor, and never mind the number of NGOs here, never mind the amount of dollars or pounds or euros that have come in. That needs to change.
Thank you, Moses. And Roswitha, over to you.
Thank you. So I'm in agreement with the key barriers that have been highlighted by the other panelists in terms of the shrinking civic space, the operational capacity challenges that we are facing, and also maybe just to add on in terms of the urgency point where we spoke around some of the challenges in terms of perceptions on national NGOs from NGOs, and also issues around the fact that we end up having unequal partnerships where, you know, they are the ones that determine the use of resources and how you're supposed to implement the programs or the project. But what I'm also getting from this discussion, which is key, is that we need to also see how we can also work with the national NGOs in terms of how we can reshape the development narrative in terms of even us having conversations and defining what we think is key to locally led development, and how we can also be able to push back, as has been highlighted before. But I also want to highlight another issue is that from my experience, I think we also need donor coordination sometimes, because there are a lot of, you know, it can also create challenges like what has been said. You're working with 1 or 2 funding partners, they've different requirements, and it all creates challenges even in terms of us being able to be there on the ground to mobilize the citizens. And I think what we need to do more to realize the change that we are discussing is that how do we co-create new partnership models and ways of working where the partnerships are based on openness, inclusivity, fairness, equity, and there is transparency, you know, as we engage and partner with the relevant partners. But I think maybe to also end up by saying, as national NGOs, I think there are lots of opportunities that we need to leverage on to also see how we can be able to harness or leverage on local funding for us to be able to do our work, and also identifying other opportunities that are there within the current context in terms of how they can also enhance the development work that we are doing. For example, how do we utilize technology? How do we also do more work around sustainable development? How do we also ensure that we do a lot of collaboration and coordination? Because as long as we are not united, as long as we are not able to push with one voice, we will continue having these challenges. So I also envision a scenario where we can be able to come together, push this agenda, and be able to change the development discourse to also fit the context that we are working in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosita. I am going to wrap this up here. We are at time. I'm going to just throw out some terms and thoughts that we've just heard mentioned: radical love, trust, partnerships of significance. Let's change the sector. Let's change the way things work. I thank you all for your participation and for all of your comments, thoughts, and I appreciate the provocative nature of today's discussion, because that is what we need. We need to bust out of the traditional lines of discussion that we have been having and really open up and move into new territory. So thank you all so much. For all of our participants, I just want to remind you that we will be sending out a follow-up email that will include the recording of today's webinar. So thank you for participating. I want to also remind everyone that Humentum has a policy blueprint around locally led development that was published a couple of months ago that we invite you to consult. We will also have a report coming out in May that is on amplifying the perspectives of local and national organization leaders on subjects of locally led development and the challenges to moving towards transformation. So thank you all so much. And really, this has been the best part of my day so far, and I think it will be the best part of my week and probably my month, because this was a great conversation. So I look forward to continuing it, and wish you all well with the rest of your day. Thank you, and thanks to all of our participants, and we will see you again soon. Bye-bye.